to get more into this conversation about the Sixers, the NBA playoffs, and more. He is back. Bryan Toporek, the co-host of the NBA podcast, joins us right now on 97.3 ESPN. Bryan, how you doing after that debacle last night?
Well, Josh, I just changed the poopy diaper, and that was more enjoyable than watching Game 4 last night.
Wonderful answer. So let me because you were cleaning the diaper and I was ranting and raving, I'll just give you a little bit of a synopsis of what I spent about 15 minutes losing my mind about.
Oh, boy.
I never thought in my lifetime, or at least this basketball season, I would come on the radio and I would say about this Sixers team, with this roster, with these players, they stopped playing defense last night. They literally just said, we're not going to play defense for the rest of the fourth quarter. And then you have John Collins getting dunks, and then Trae Young is dishing dimes and getting scores and getting floaters. And the Sixers became more interested arguing with the refs than doing the one thing that got them wins in the last two games, games 2 and 3, which was limiting Trae Young. And at the end of the night, the Hawks still shot 36% from the field, and you still lost because you lost focus on the goal.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to find good things from last night. Seth Curry deserves props. That's about it. Otherwise, I mean, I think their shot selection contributed to the defensive struggles as well. Like if you mentioned trying to foul bait, Embiid obviously had, one of his worst playoff games ever, especially in the third quarter, as he misses his first couple mid-range shots. He goes back to the locker room. He said after the game he didn't feel like he had it. So in the third quarter, you could feel him start to be pressing a little bit more. And, he was trying to take on double and triple teams and draw fouls, and we didn't get calls. He threw his hands up in the air, was slow getting back on defense. And that just leads to a cascading effect where it's like, okay, you missed a shot, but at least you have to play hard on the other end still. It was just an overall complete disaster from a team performance. And honestly, they were lucky to only lose by 3. I mean, you mentioned the Hawks shot 36%. They shot 36% on a number of wide open looks that they just missed last night. You can't expect that to carry on moving forward. So the Sixers really need to tighten up on both ends of the ball if they're going to win the series.
The other thing was that I think that last night we saw the real value of Danny Green, which is no Danny Green meant there was no adult on the court. Remember Brett Brown used to call the adult in the room Jimmy Butler? Well, there was no adult on the court to grab Ben, to grab Joel, to grab Tobias, or whoever's on the court and be like, guys, wake up. We're playing like garbage. And I've heard so many times throughout the year, Doc Rivers, Matisse Thybulle, Ben Simmons, almost everybody on this team says Danny Green always knows what to say, when to say it, when we need to hear it. And last night, Danny Green wasn't on the court to say what needed to be said, and nobody was there to say, hey, guys, we're playing like garbage. We need to wake up.
Yeah, I'm going to butcher the exact phrasing, but Doc said basically, like, Danny Green always plays at his own pace. And, like, when things are getting chaotic and hectic in the playoffs, Danny's just there chilling in, like, a good way. He's just keeping his composure. It felt like the Sixers last night lost theirs, especially, as Embiid is not getting it going. Like, throughout the season, Embiid has bailed them out time and again with his improved mid-range shooting. He didn't have that last night. Seth Curry kind of took over that role for at least part of the game. Like, Seth Curry was phenomenal and really bailed them out of a number of bad offensive possessions. But then, Doc was saying after the game, the ball movement just completely stagnated. Like, they started the game in hero ball. They had a great stretch in the second quarter where Embiid's, passing out of double teams and trusting his teammates. And then in the third quarter and really the whole second half, it just turned into isolation basketball. And the Sixers don't have the personnel to play that way. Like, they need to trust their teammates. They need Joel and Ben to pass out Joel pass out of double teams, Ben drive and kick to open shooters. When that's not happening, you get what we saw last night, which is just a bunch of aimless offensive possessions. And, that dovetails into what happens defensively.
By the way, also, speaking of Seth Curry, last night was the first game of the regular season or the postseason the Sixers have lost when Seth Curry scores at least 15 points. They were previously 18-0 before last night. So that tells you Seth did his job.
Yeah.
The rest of the team didn't. Bryan Toporek joining us here on Game Night on 97.3 ESPN. At B Toporek on Twitter. The podcast is the NBA Podcast. Him and Mort do a great job on the pod. So moving forward, obviously Game 5 is tomorrow night. They gotta do something different. And I'm starting to wonder, maybe Korkmaz was a good idea to start the game, but it seemed like as the game went on, the Hawks found ways to take advantage of him. Matisse Thybulle obviously is not an offensive option. You know, I've heard two people say today that Danny Green is the best of both Korkmaz and Matisse Thybulle on the court. You know, he's an amalgamation. So is the solution going in the next game, find somebody else for those minutes? You know, maybe minimize Korkmaz's exposure because he played, 25, 26 minutes last night. Limit the exposure of him and maybe find more minutes for, I don't know, George Hill, Tyrese Maxey maybe?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough because, as you said, you know, Danny, it's been a tough series for him before the calf injury. I would not say he was playing particularly well, but he also, outside of game 1 where they foolishly put him on Trae Young, he wasn't killing them. Like, they weren't actively seeking out targeting Danny Green on defense. Korkmaz, on the other hand, you know, when you've got Curry and Korkmaz in the backcourt, that's just too many weak links when you're going against a team with Trae Young and Bogdan Bogdanovic. And Bogdan really seemed to go after Korkmaz a lot last night. So I don't know if, you know, I'm guessing Doc might stick with the same starting 5, but maybe Cork's minutes go down if he's not knocking down shots or if they're really starting to go after him defensively. I like the idea conceptually of George Hill playing more with the starters because really that's what they brought him in to be. You know, hypothetically, if this was like the full-fledged version of George Hill that we haven't really seen except for in fits and starts. But, you know, Daryl Morey right after the trade deadline was saying at the end of the game, when Danny's healthy, we can have 5 two-way guys on the court. We can have our big 3. We can have Danny. We can have George. Playoff tested, two-way guys, no weaknesses on either end. You know, obviously that's not possible now with Danny hurt. And, you know, Cork's going to be a liability on defense. Matisse is going to be a liability on offense. I think George is probably the best two-way option they have at their disposal until Danny returns. So I would like to see more of him, but at the same time, you take him away from that second unit and, you know, they're relying on him a lot to take some of the ball handling pressure off Shake Milton. So there's really no perfect answer here. And I think it speaks to the value of Danny Green to this team, even though, you know, on nights where he's not knocking down a ton of threes, like his stat lines tend to look pedestrian. All the little things he does, you know, entry passes last night were an adventure for most of the game. Like just having someone to throw good entry passes. It doesn't sound like a lot, but when you're playing out of the post as much as the Sixers do, they need that. And they were lacking that last night as well. So I'd like to see George get a little more run, but I just don't think there's a great answer here, unfortunately.
No, there's not. But I just feel like, you know, Doc has a history of not being a slave to certain lineups. Like I remember when he was in Boston, there were so many times that he would experiment who the 5th guy was. Because we all knew the 4 were in Boston. It was KG, it was Paul, it was Ray Allen, it was Rondo. But some nights it was Brian Scalabrine. Other nights it was Glenn Big Baby Davis, right? Like he was a guy who he was never a slave to a lineup. He did the same thing with the Clippers, same thing in Orlando. And I would like to see Doc not trot Korkmaz back out there. And I almost want to say anybody but Korkmaz, because I just think Korkmaz, he's a bench player. And I don't know if he's a guy you want out there for more than 20 minutes a game, because I think when you take him out of his limited exposure, it hurts you. And for me, like you mentioned, George Hill was brought here for a reason. Heck, you're at home tomorrow night, right? Start Maxey, for goodness sake.
Yeah.
Tell Tyrese to go out there and go nuts for 8 minutes and see what happens. Because you know what? Maybe you just need that just go to the poker table and throw a little extra on the bend and just say, what the heck?
Yeah, I mean, I think Doc has had a really good feel for this team for most of the playoffs, like knowing to go to Shake toward the end of game 2 of this series, bringing in Furkan or early in game 3, Tyrese Maxey in game 5 of the Wizards series. I don't want to blame Doc's rotations for why they lost last night. They lost last night because Joel Embiid went
Brian, the players lost last night.
Yeah,
Doc didn't lose the game.
Yeah, exactly. Ultimately, all of this fundamentally comes down to Joel Embiid is playing on a torn meniscus. If we see the version that played in the second half last night, if that's the version of Joel Embiid that we get moving forward, the Sixers are not going to advance. Or if they do advance, they're not going to advance past the Eastern Conference Finals. They need the games 1 through 3 Embiid. And that's the question mark that no one's going to have a good answer to until we see what he looks like tomorrow night. He goes back to the locker room in the first half to get treatment. He kind of downplayed it after the game, but I thought, honestly, he gave some pretty alarming answers where, someone asked him about that last layup that he blew. And he's saying, normally I'd go up and dunk that and try to get an and one, but I just didn't have lift for obvious reasons. And it was that's a alarmingly honest answer for Joel Embiid if we're looking, moving forward at their prospects for the rest of the series.
Well, let's get to Embiid then. Obviously, he's playing hurt. I think we all can see it. I think last night was the most obvious, right? Last night was the first time he would try to do that fadeaway jumper, but he's not really getting the lift off the right foot, right? He tries to do that one move in the post, and you could tell he's doing it about half speed because maybe he's afraid to plant too hard on the knee. Can the Sixers win with Embiid only being at 50 to 80%?
They can. Their margin for error is a lot less. And, if they're going to only turn the Hawks over 4 times in a game, probably not. They need to get back to who they are fundamentally. They are, they've built their identity on defense. Even if Embiid is limited offensively, he at least can provide something defensively. I mean, he pulled down 21 rebounds last night. So, you're not going to have the bailout option of Embiid. You're going to need more aggressive Seth Curry, more aggressive Tobias Harris. I'm hesitant to even bring up the next name because that's going to get to a whole other subject, but more aggressive Ben Simmons as well. The rest of his team, he's been lifting this team up on his shoulders the entire season. They're going to have to do the same to him if he's limited in the same way that he was in game 4.
Well, then let's touch on Ben Simmons because you brought the infamous name up. Everyone's losing their mind. Here's my position on Ben Simmons. And if people want to say I'm being dismissive, fine. All right? Here's my position. I don't expect Ben Simmons to be anything that he's not. Yeah. Ben Simmons is a guy who plays great defense. He's going to go out there and get you somewhere between 7 and 11 assists a night. He's going to be close to getting a triple-double every night. He's basically a lesser offensive version of Jason Kidd, basically. That's how I look at him. I never expected him to be anything more than that, but because he was drafted number 1 overall, even though in the last 20-plus years only been 3 number 1 overall picks who have actually done anything legitimate in the league, but still, he's drafted number 1 overall. There's a level of expectations. Brian, I compare it to, you see a movie trailer. You think the movie's great. You go to the movie. The movie doesn't line up with the trailer. It doesn't mean the movie is bad. It just means your expectations were wrong for that movie. That's what I think of Ben Simmons.
Yeah, if you're expecting him to be LeBron James 2.0, you're going to be disappointed. He's not going to be the second best player of all time. Sorry, it's just not in the cards. There's a range of outcomes between that and he's a total bust and the Sixers need to trade him. And I think, there's that area of gray is probably where we're at. But no, I don't expect Ben Simmons to suddenly score 40 points in game 5. I think we did see in the second half of game 3 where they did turn to him more as a scorer. There are ways to get him going, but you're watching the Bucks game, Bucks game 3, I think it was, where Giannis takes 8 threes, and every time he takes one, all of Twitter is like, why are you shooting threes? Why are you shooting threes? Just get to the post, play to your strengths. And it's well, why are you saying this different for Ben Simmons? that Ben Simmons shooting a three is not his strength, or shooting a mid-range jumper. Does he need to add those things to his game to give himself a higher ceiling and give the Sixers a higher ceiling? Absolutely. But that shouldn't come off as blasphemous. I mean, you could have said the same thing about Joel Embiid last year. Did he need to become a much better mid-range shooter? Did he need to be able to improve his passing and pass out of the double teams more efficiently? Yes. And he made those improvements, and now he's an MVP candidate. If Ben Simmons improves as a free throw shooter, adds a mid-range jumper, adds a three-point shot at some point in his career, he has the talent defensively. He could be one of the best two-way players in the league. He could get into that MVP conversation. It's just not going to happen overnight, and no one should expect him in this series to all of a sudden start shooting like Seth Curry, for instance.
By the way, I won't let LeBron know you call him the second best player of all time. I'll keep that between us, okay?
At worst.
Listen, I'm worse than you. I say he's the third best player of all time. So.
Oh wow.
Well, because I love to ruin the argument. I'm the jerk who comes in the middle of the Jordan LeBron argument, and I say Kareem's the best, and I ruin the argument for everybody. So.
There you go. Well, LeBron's still got time. That's the thing. He can still move up a little bit.
I just think it's funny that we see all these commercials now because they're trying to pump up Space Jam 2 coming out. Yeah. And the one ESPN related promotional piece is called The Bunny and the Goat. And it's like, I can just see Jordan sitting somewhere with the look he has when he's looking at the iPad from The Last Dance, where he starts just laughing. And that's stupid, and just throws the iPad aside. I can totally see that being Jordan when he sees that promo.
Yeah, no clutch clients will be signing with the Charlotte Hornets for a while.
Right. Yeah. Bryan Toporek joining us here on the Boardwalk on the Hotline here on Game Night on 97.3 ESPN at @Toporek on Twitter. We'd be remiss if we don't touch on the series that's going on tonight in the Eastern Conference. That's the Nets and the Bucks. It's a 2-2 tie series. I think Harden's playing. I'm not really sure. I mean, the way he's gone from being out to doubtful to questionable, either he's had super healing abilities or we're not being told something here.
I know after Game 4, Steve Nash was saying Harden's injury and Kyrie's injury are two separate entities, and we are not going to rush back James Harden just because Kyrie is hurt. I would like to believe that, but I would also think if Kyrie Irving is healthy, James Harden is not playing tonight. I think Harden knows really their season is on the line tonight. If they lose this game, they're going to lose 3 straight, go back to Milwaukee for Game 6. I can't imagine Kyrie is playing in 2 days either. So I understand why he's playing. I am super nervous that he is going to aggravate that thing early on and have to leave again, and that's going to be it for him this season. So regardless of what happens in the game itself, I just hope for his sake that he makes it out healthy.
Yeah, because I'm 100% with you. I love you that you said that because at the end of the day, I don't like seeing these players hurt. You know what I mean? I don't like seeing Harden grabbing the back of his leg, Kyrie laying on the ground grabbing his ankle. Whether you like or dislike these players, you want to see the best players in the world out there doing their thing, right? So I don't know. I'm worried that he's going to come back and it's going to be the third quarter. He goes for another layup and he pulls up lame again. And, listen, I had said all along that the Nets are a team that, Brian, I couldn't trust them to be healthy. Doesn't mean I wish them to be unhealthy. Those are two separate things for me. And I'm just worried that Harden comes back tonight and, all right, he's going to get hurt again. Or what if Harden comes back and then tonight Durant gets hurt? Then what happens?
Yeah, well, then the Nets are done. That's what happens. But, yeah, to your credit, you had been hammering that, every time I came on. I was saying, if the Nets are healthy, they're my title favorite. And you were like, are we sure they're going to be healthy the whole playoffs? And as we've seen, the Kyrie thing, I know a lot of people are blaming Adam Silver in the NBA for, pushing through this abridged season and, not having a ton of the layoff from last season. The Kyrie thing was not an overuse injury. It's just a freak injury. He lands on a guy's foot. What are you going to do?
Right.
The soft tissue ones are the ones where you can, that one might be more debatable. But yeah, I hope everyone from this point forward in the playoffs, no more injuries. Let's just turn off the injuries because there have already been way too many. And it's going to be a bummer because at this point, it just feels like whichever team just doesn't have a star player go down, that's who's going to make it to the finals. Or that's who's going to be the NBA champion this year.
Of course, the Nets and Bucks coverage begins at 8 o'clock tonight right here on 97.3 ESPN. Sixers tomorrow night. Coverage begins at 7:30 here on 97.3 ESPN. Bryan, you are the co-host of the NBA podcast, so before I let you go, I know the reports are out there. It looks like Chauncey Billups is probably going to be the next coach of Portland, but I can't stand something else that's going on that Portland did. They interviewed Mike D'Antoni. When are we going to be done interviewing the retreads who have literally done absolutely nothing to qualify them after like Stan Van Gundy got a job in New Orleans over probably 5 people who are all being interviewed right now for jobs who could have had the New Orleans job, but we were convinced that Stan Van Gundy turned into a fundamental basketball team. Their defense was garbage this year. I don't understand, why is Mike D'Antoni getting more interviews? I don't understand it.
Hey, it's better than Jason Kidd getting more interviews. I'll say that.
Is it though? Is it better?
Yeah, definitely, for both on and off court reasons, which we could leave it at that. But look, I mean, to your point about Portland, offense was not their problem this year. They were 29th ranked team on defense, so I don't know that Mike D'Antoni fixes that. I guess the counter to the argument of why are we going through all these retreads, a retread has a history, is a known quantity. So you at least know what you are getting out of Mike D'Antoni, where, you can go for an assistant mystery box coach and hope he turns into a Ty Lue or a Nick Nurse or someone like that. But at the same time, it could also turn into a Nate Bjorkgren situation where, the person just wasn't ready for the responsibilities of being a head coach, lacked, from all reports coming out of Indiana, Bjorkgren was a good X's and O's guy, just lacked the people management skills. So, going to a team like Portland in particular, where you've got some veteran guys, you're in a win now window, and you're starting to hear that clock tick a little bit on Dame, I can understand not necessarily wanting to go with a first-time coach, but at the same time, I mean, Chauncey, like Ty Lue gave rave reviews about Chauncey recently, and his history as an NBA champion as a point guard. I can also see why Dame would really like to see him as the next coach. So I'm interested. I mean, the big report today, or rumor that's been circulating Twitter today, is that Portland wanted to go after Eric Spoelstra, which I think
I saw that.
That would be the fun one.
Yeah, I mean, and I wouldn't hate that, but I just don't see Spoelstra ever leaving Miami. I feel like he's going to be to the Miami Heat what Don Shula was the Dolphins. I feel like Spoelstra is going to be in Miami forever. Pat Riley is going to be dead and gone, and he's going to still be working either the sidelines or the front office in Miami. Like, I would be surprised if Pat retires at 85 years old and Spoelstra does a Brad Stevens down in Miami. I wouldn't be surprised if that happens.
Yeah, I don't think he's leaving Miami either. But look, when you have an open search, I mean, the Sixers proved it last year. You might as well shoot for the stars and then settle if you have to. But, sometimes things fall into place for you, such as Doc Rivers and Daryl Morey becoming available.
Well, hopefully Popovich retires soon so Becky Hammond can just be the coach in waiting in San Antonio, because the fact that she's interviewed for 5-6 jobs now.
Yeah.
And I mean, at some point, no offense to Pop, I understand that, it's San Antonio. He could do whatever he wants. But there's got to be a part of him that's like, I'm old. Tim Duncan ain't walking through that door. Tony Parker ain't walking through that door. We can do the Rick Pitino game with the Spurs and just be like, you know what? I've had a good run. Becky, how about you take over at this point?
Yeah. Well, I mean, all their veterans are about to walk out the door. Maybe Pop follows them out and, they move into this rebuild with a new coach.
He's Bryan Toporek at B Toporek on Twitter for all of your NBA coverage. The NBA podcast, Bryan Toporek, Morton Jensen, and as all guests, Bryan appeared on the Boardwalk High Hotline. Bryan, great stuff today.
Always happy to come on, Josh.